Welcome everyone to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard, and this is Chingazos and Fire episode number 52. Our guest today is Matt Welch. He is the editor at large at Reason Magazine, the author of two books, one on John McCain not being so mavericky, and the other on how libertarian politics can fix America. He's the co-host of the Fifth Column podcast and the Reason Roundtable. And along with Nick Gillespie, he's one of my favorite guests on Real Time with Bill Maher, because I know when these Vatos come on, they're on my team. So it's always good to see them on. So thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you. It's good to be called a Vato for the first time in a while. So
fair enough, man. I always like to just start these shows, obviously, with some of the little background intro. I like to say that half of the audience is political and the other half is probably my illegal cousins and skills. So some will know you, some won't. And if you don't mind, just kind of give your background, but I kind of more like your born and raised, siblings, family kind of background, and then we can get into the other stuff.
Yeah, sure. I'm from Long Beach, California, born and raised there. Long Beach is in LA County. And at the time that I was born, especially, it was the kind of aerospace cradle of the United States in the South Bay and Long Beach area. My dad's an aerospace engineer, worked at Rockwell, worked on the Apollo program, and did a lot of satellites and things like that. Everyone's dad where I grew up was an engineer. I thought that was normal. It turns out it wasn't. It's just that really everyone worked for aerospace. McDonnell Douglas was down the street, close to Long Beach Airport. They had at its peak when I was a teenager, something like 80,000 jobs. They used to build 2 airplanes a day at the hangar there, which is crazy during World War II.
What do you mean a day? Like
a day?
But they had been working them for a week or two, and now they finished 2, or you mean they were able to turnkey?
They were able to finish 2.
To knock out 2. They had 2. Oh, okay, yeah. Cool.
I went there sometime in 2006 or so when I was working at the LA Times. I went to the last day that line produced commercial aircraft. It's pretty sad. Gigantic hangar. I think it's now probably an Amazon warehouse. But it was just amazing. Anyway, so that was. I always grew up hating commies because we were fighting the Cold War, and then went to UC Santa Barbara briefly. I got kicked out for bad grades, but I had gone to fell in love with the daily newspaper there, and that's how I got my start in journalism at age 18. And when I was 21, I traveled to Europe right after when I would have graduated normally. And I was lucky enough that when I was 21, the Berlin Wall fell. And so my idea and the idea of a lot of Americans at the time were around my age were like, hey, let's take a one-way ticket and go see what those people are doing. So I lived in post-communist Central Europe for close to 8 years in Prague, Budapest, and Bratislava during that time, which had a pretty profound influence on the way I think about the world, especially under the influence of people like Václav Havel and some of the great anti-communist thinkers and doers at the time. And I started a newspaper there, did a bunch of journalism stuff, came back to America after a failed attempt, to move to Cuba with my then newlywed wife, who was also a journalist. At the time, we thought, hey, we've been in Central Europe studying or writing about post-communism. Why don't we go, since the Castros obviously are going to fall any day now? So we did that in 1998. Turns out that was a bit premature. And it didn't last very long. It was much more difficult than we thought. And when that experiment failed, came back to the States, and I've just been doing journalism ever since. LA Times, Reason mostly, and other places. And I now live in Brooklyn, New York, with my 2 daughters and wife, and trying to get back to life after the shitty pandemic.
Cool, man. We're in. I have 2 daughters too, so it's always cool to talk to some homies that have the niñas in the crew. So the way that this interview came to be, it's kind of cool. I tweeted at you, and you were like, yeah, let's do an interview. You agreed to it, and you were having a conversation on the Bill Marshall, which you were recently on, and I thought it was cool because I always think so just so you know, just a little bit of my background is that my I got my whole a lot of my politics has always been like watching Bill Maher. So when I got into Ron Paul or things like that, Bill Maher was kind of like my he's what I like to say, like I got pace setters. So Bill Maher's a pace setter. Whoever he brings on or doesn't, I always respect whatever he's doing. And then so when he has you guys on, or I always think it's cool. But that you guys were having a conversation with another guest that was there, and of course with Bill, and it was about immigration. And basically, you had kind of made a joke that was kind of like that. Hey, you're not going to ever see a Chad or a Tyler at Home Depot looking for work, and it's funny because it's true, but it's also I wouldn't say sad, but it's a situation that should be kind of looked at like why that isn't why not, but it doesn't have to be bad or good. I don't know. I mean, I guess that was one of the main reasons why I reached. I even like I didn't think you were going to say yes. I just tweeted and you said yeah, but yeah, why don't we see Chads and Tylers at Home Depot? And even though it's a short question, man, give the long answer because I know it's I know there's a long answer there that needs to be talked about.
Well, it's you're on TV, so you want to do a short and funny line that maybe sands around the edges, but it's also true. I mean, I remember being in LA when I was pretty poor, and we were moving from one place to another in East Hollywood, and like filled most of the truck, but there's some heavy shit in there, and I needed some muscle, and so we went down. I don't think it was even a Home Depot. Yeah, it was a Home Depot in this case, but U-Haul also would have day laborers out there. And what was even more hilarious is that, and I swear I'm not making any of this up. So Latino dudes, I presume Mexican, could have been Central American, and we get them, and they come and load our heavy couches and things. And as we're driving, there was a new movie out, like a bad. This is what would it be? 2002, around there. So maybe it was Daredevil. Does that ring a bell? Like a Ben Affleck bad superhero movie. And we're sitting there. It's like a scene out of there was I think a Steve Martin movie satirizing Hollywood, in which like the illegal immigrants that he hires to make a movie are like arguing about the finer points of cinema. That exactly happened. These dudes were like talking in Spanish, and I don't know enough Spanish to kind of get it. They were talking in Spanish about like Ben Affleck. He's not really believable. Like, are you kidding me? When that's I paid you 20 hours to move a couch, and you're like dropping truth bombs about Ben Affleck. Fantastic. Anyways, it's a truism about Southern California. At least was when I lived there. I moved away in 2008, but I presume it's still true. Where if you go to a place where people are renting stuff or doing hauls, there's a line of people there who are almost all Latino out looking for work. It's a couple of things I think lead to that. One is just the obviousness of who comes to this country to work, or who are the most hungry to work people in this country. It is immigrants, regardless. Immigrants who are not like your 85-year-old grandmother from India, and that's a lot of that used to be until Trump cut that off. Used to be a large source of immigration as well, but generally it's immigrants and illegal immigrants even more so. Illegal immigrants skew more towards young males than the immigrant population does, because why? It's harder to get in the country, especially in the last 20 years. It's super arduous with the wall and the rules and everything else like that. You got to be kind of a badass to get in this country. And so, yeah, you came here for a reason. You're going to goddamn work. And this coincides with sort of the proximate cause of what we were talking about on Bill Maher, which is, he cast it as like, what's wrong with men nowadays, and men are in crisis. I always tend to get a little bit reticent about making vast generalizations, but it's really interesting to look at employment statistics among groups of males in the last 20 years. Every age group of males works less than it did before, especially than it did 20 years before, especially young, right? 20 years ago, something like 54% of teenage males worked. Now it's 1 out of every 3. It's like 33%. That's a huge change. I mean, when I was a teenager in the 80s, we worked. it was sort of understood that you did that. Now, by the time people are getting to be 25, half of men have not worked. Holy crap, what is that? And that sort of filters in the whole employment picture up until age 55, and then the stats are that they work a lot more. So if there isn't just the normal like work ethic, the normal I'm going to work over Christmas vacation hauling Christmas trees. That is something every single kid did at some point, or you work as a babysitter, you work at McDonald's, both of which I did as well. Who's going to do that if if you don't develop the muscle memory and habit? So you have kind of less work as an ethic among domestic native born males, and you have immigrants looking for work. And I think this is the combination of why you get this now. It's amazing. I live in Brooklyn, and there's a help wanted sign in every single window of every store on our commercial block. And I'm telling my 14-year-old, like, if you weren't so troubled at the moment, and also if you just decided to do it, you could work anywhere you wanted to for a lot of money, actually. Here, like, that hoodie that you really want to buy online, you could afford it and also have independence, because people are desperate for work now. And it's interesting that it's not happening so much. So long way of saying that it's very funny. You're young, but I'm not, and I'm still old enough to remember when there was the what do you call it? The prejudice, not the prejudice, but the caricature of Mexicans is lazy, right? Like there's like Mexicans sleeping under their sombrero underneath a cactus saying "mañana." Like, seriously, go up and look up. There's I think
really that was around. I've never heard it. I always thought that. Well, I'm 39, but as a kid growing up, like I never heard of that. So you're old enough to. People would say that the Mexicans were lazy.
People seriously said it's as dumb as saying Polish people were stupid, which is the other thing that was a common ethnic slur at the time, which is the opposite of true. Polish people are super smart. But yeah, Mexicans were lazy. They say "mañana" is good enough for me. Check it out. It's a great song from, I think, Peggy Lee in the 50s. And that was sort of the concept. It's ridiculous. The one demographic in this country that works more than any other as a percentage of the able-bodied population are Hispanic males. Like, it's just, they actually work harder. If we're going to collectivize people, which we obviously should not, but we've already measured the category, they work harder. So yeah, all of this contributes to that. And when we've choked off immigration, which we have in this country, and people don't like to talk about it that way because they don't experience, they see the chaos at the border, they see the politics around it. But legal immigration has been really clamped down by first the Trump administration, but it's ongoing with the Biden administration. If you don't have an orderly process and don't issue enough work visas, you're not going to have enough road workers, and you're going to miss that that injection of vitality into the country. And I think that's to be lamented. I've lived in places that don't have immigrants. They suck. They just suck. Immigrants are by nature creative and interesting and enriching of the culture. Not everybody agrees with me on that. Fine, but that's certainly what I've experienced in my life.
So, what are Chad and Tyler doing if they're not going to work at an early age? If they're not going to Home Depot to look for some work? If they're not having some extra money to go to the clubs or whatever, or do whatever, so what are they doing? Have the parents or different or past generations built up enough? I wouldn't say wealth or they put themselves in positions that they do have really nice basements where they can stay there forever, stay there for a long time. I mean, I'm asking because also it's weird because I have a nephew. He's the only boy, and his dad's not around. So I'm the male guy, right? And he's playing Fortnite and all that shit. And I was like, dude, go with me to go do this deal. And on the way over there, he's only like 10. And I was just trying to tell him, look, I know you're not gonna work like that. I know that. So let me start showing you how to hustle a little bit. So I was just telling him about middlemen and the clients and suppliers and by the end of the trip, he was looking at everything. Like, he went to IHOP. He goes, "Oh, IHOP's the middleman. He connects the producer supply." And he was looking at everything, and I go, "Yes, dude." I was like, "That's gonna make you that lesson's gonna make you $500,000 in your life, man. Congratulations! I just made you half a millionaire." And but the reason I bring that up is that I have now created a generation that's not gonna he's not gonna go to Home Depot. So I understand how a Chad and Tyler don't go to Home Depot, and as newer generations come in, they don't have to be at Home Depot. Am I making those parallels right? Is that
Yeah. I think that's classic case where we live here. It's pretty close to a heavily Chinese immigrant neighborhood. It's actually a Chinese and Latino kind of overlaps, right where they had a subway shooter a few months ago. Everyone's already forgotten about it, but in Sunset Park. And it's the classic thing where these are poor Chinese immigrants who work their absolute like eyes out doing anything so that their kids will go, who don't speak English necessarily very well, some of them are immigrant kids themselves, will work their ass off in school, and they will go and find, the only schools that are left that still measure quality students and have sort of specialized high schools. And yes, it's that point. Those kids don't work those jobs. They instead become doctors or lawyers or academics or something like that. Go from blue collar to white collar. That's a normal thing. I think so that's part of it. Chad and Tyler, whose parents aren't necessarily immigrants, I think we've seen. I think it overlaps with kind of the helicopter parenting, and also which itself is affected by the reduction in size of families, right? Kids are treated as more precious objects now because they actually are. I have, 4 brothers and sisters and 2 stepsisters. That's now like a freak show sized family. And it was pretty normal in the 70s. I mean, really, like I do it myself. If I have a friend who's like, "Oh yeah, we're having our 3rd kid," I'm like, "Oh, okay. So like, what's your ethnicity or what's your religion?" Like, there's got to be the explanation where, like, when I was growing up, that's the size of families back there were that big. So when you treat people as more special, and there's a lot of societal kind of pressure and funneling to protect the kids. I grew up in the 70s and we were feral. We were latchkey kids. Go watch a documentary like Dogtown and Z Boys about Southern California in the 70s, where they're just like these bored white kids on skateboards, and there's just no adults anywhere. That's what I grew up in. Mm-hmm. And I would love to because I you find your freedom, you make your mistakes, you have a great time, you have a bad time too. And as much as I want to reproduce that for my children, in certain ways, I want them to feel what it's like to take responsibility for their own affairs. The society around us is not that way, and the pressures go in a different direction. And also, you're like, yeah, I don't really want them to be that free, do I? I don't really want them to be that just sort of untethered. So that contributes to all of it. During the Obama administration, to make a small policy point, I remember they issued federal rules that limited the ability of extended child labor laws to make sure that no 16-year-old boy could do something like work in the summers hauling or clearing trees in Oregon, where my parents are from. And that was a total rite of passage in Oregon. Like, that's just like, dealing with Christmas trees at Christmas. On the lot in the summer, you clear forests and you move trees because you're 16 and you got to expend your energy somehow and make some money. The Obama administration rules cut that out. We have a sense of like, oh my God,
was a specific rule, a specific wording to that, or just
it was specific, something to do with physical labor and kids under a certain age, right? Okay. And so it was sold and intended, I'm sure, as like, oh, we want to extend the child labor law protections, but the way that it actually worked out in practice is that it made that type of work illegal. And I mean, technically, a lot of babysitting work is that we all did growing up is illegal, but everyone sort of knows, and you can do it off the books. But so a lot of that has kind of like collapsed on itself. And I think that we have a societal thing where there's kind of only one main path that's valued, or like in the culture is like, of course, if you are middle class, upper middle class, or rich, all of your kids must go to as much college as possible. And as someone who was kicked out of college, I'm a little sensitive to that. And it's also that devalues, whole industries like the ones you're in. I mean, my God, you can make bank in construction if you work your ass off, become a contractor, and jump through the hoops. You can make absolute bank being a welder and doing a bunch of other things. And as people know who've tried to build a house during the pandemic, kind of hard to get a plumber around these days. You have entire sectors of the job industry that somehow don't get the same kind of cultural cachet and respect as just going to college. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think we should over venerate let's have every 16-year-old boy go and work in shop and metals and stuff. I think that can be overdone as well. But just to say that there's a lot of different ways to go through life, and we should value work ethic wherever it goes. It shouldn't only be one kind of work that we venerate, and realize that there's a lot of great ingenuity that comes from this country in all of these industries as well. And not having that kind of pipeline, that idea of starting to figure out how to work and to be an independent human being when you're a teenager, I think is kind of a mistake.
Yeah. Do you if you don't mind me asking, how old are your girls?
14 and 7. So
okay.
I would love it very much if the 14-year-old could get it together. It'll take a while. It's been a rough pandemic for the family. But she's smart as a tack, and can do whatever she wants. And it's hard. I mean, I need you to come over and drive her to IHOP and show her what's
up. Yeah, that's funny.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Just wanted to tell you about some new products that palomaverdecbd.com is carrying on their website. We have these new 25 milligram CBD and 5 milligrams THC gummies. These things are puro lumbre. We usually have parties, and they're always bumping. We have good parties here at the house. It's a party house here, and we had received them, our new order or our new shipment, and we gave them out to everybody. And it was funny, man. We had some friends come over later, and they're like, the vibe is a little different. It's people were playing, people that normally don't play pool were playing pool. There was like jazz music. It was kind of mellow. And I remember it's the gummies. Everybody is mellowed out a little bit, and they have a little bit of the THC is kicking in. So these right here are legal under the Farm Bill, because the dry weight makes it that way, but the formula has 5 milligrams of THC in them. So go check out palomaverdecbd.com. Get yourself some THC gummies, and don't forget to use the promo code Chingazos, CHINGASOS, to get 20% off your order. Go get yourself some of these new gummies, and we also have other new products. You're gonna enjoy these. We do. Peace.
So my wife. So I want to be more old school with my daughters, and I'll let them wander. I'm keeping an eye on my oldest one is 4, but at an early age, I told her I taught her the thumbs up, if you're good, thumbs up. So at a real young age, almost 2 or 3, she would get far enough where she would look around for me, but I was feeling her out, and she would give me the thumbs up, and it was just at parties, family parties, but so it was still protected. But I'm more old school like that, and my wife is it, and I do feel that a lot of it was propaganda, right? Or scare or fear tactics that the news would have been selling, to scare you, oh, your kids are going to get stolen or whatever. And yeah, I was like you too, man. I remember they would just let us free. And then when it gets dark, you needed to come back, to eat dinner and really to catch up on the novela, because those novelas are pretty good too, right? I had to catch up on those. So like, but I remember all of that. I also remember like as a kid, I tell my wife, she trips out. I'm only like 4 years older than her, but like she trips out that we would go to a Nuevo Laredo, and some of the best naps that I ever had was, driving, my parents driving whatever, 60, 70 miles an hour in the back of the truck, just fucking sleep. I wake up and like, oh shit, we're already here in Mexico. Man, you can't do that now. Like, but I get it too. Like, you have a crash, you're flying out of the, it's over, but I don't know. Like my parents weren't bad parents. It was just a different mindset, I guess. But I mean, how much of that, is in society where, yeah, like you said, like helicopter parenting, like I understand that, but gosh, like I don't want to become that. I have young girls. I guess I'm asking you, how do how have you done now I'm asking you a parent question, because I want to, like I told you, man, I don't talk to a lot of people that have 2 daughters. So like, how have you played it,
Badly, I'm sure. That's the thing. I mean, no, it's really hard. It's a constantly kind of evolving standard, and these individuals are stubbornly individualistic, and they're going to do their own thing as well, and pursue their own interests and zig and zag as they go. It's hard. I mean, the back of the truck thing is interesting. I was just as you were saying that, remember my first time going to Mexico, and you think I lived 2 hours north of the border. Only went down there once as before I was an adult, when I was 16. Went down for a week during spring break. And how did I get there? I got there in the back of a pickup truck, like a friend's dad was driving. And of course, that's, you take a nap or hang out. And like, you don't think about it. Now you wouldn't do that. And we're right to not do that, because seatbelts are better than the back of a truck on a highway. It just kind of works. I also should add that I forgot to take my ID at the time. Imagine crossing the border without even identification. And that's what I did in both directions. I think on the way back, I had to kind of hide in the back of the truck, and they maybe put like bags over me or something. So we smuggled me into the border, which is fun. But like, some of that's just normal, like it's improvements, like, there's other ways that you can look at that. Like
sir, I need to check your papers, sir. I need to check your papers.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah.
Tus papeles.
One of the first columns I wrote when I became editor-in-chief of Reason back in 2008 was called Illegal Editor, because I was an illegal alien in Czechoslovakia in 1990.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean, it's a formerly communist country, and so you don't really respect their laws. But their laws technically were that you had to go to the border every 3 months to renew your visa, and you had to spend X amount of money a month, which I absolutely did not do. You had to change your money at the state-owned tourist agency, which I didn't. I found some Egyptians on the black market. So like, in many ways, and I started a business, which I wasn't supposed to do, all kinds of things. And Americans have this kind of, I don't want to, it's not really ethno, it's just narcissistic view of like, well, these illegal immigrants, though, what part of the law don't they understand? Okay. But if it's you doing it, right? Like there's, I forget the name of the mountain city in Mexico. I went there to a destination wedding about 15 years ago, and wrote about it. They had a huge expat newspaper, 100 pages a week in English. And it was filled with illegal gringos down there, retirees who were getting their Social Security checks, living in a really nice place where I think Trotsky ended up dying, San Miguel de Allende, up in the mountains. And when it's Americans who are out there, what part of the law don't they understand? It's like, oh, well, the law's complicated and no one really cares, and this and that. Like, oh, okay, so that's how it works for us when we're doing it. Maybe we should think about the law itself in a different way than we usually do when we suddenly are attaching a lot of like moral heaviness to the behavior of people who want to come to this country and work and live, which is kind of it's a nice gesture. It's not a mean gesture. But anyways, yeah. So like but like the way that we have gone through life now is that instead of I mean, we used to be able to travel back and forth, as you know, without showing much more than a driver's license. Those days are gone. There was a lot of work back and forth. Uh, Seasonal workers would come in. Bracero program has a lot of weird history to it. It's not all beautiful, but there was the concept of that the border was more was actually more porous in a helpful way, so that the people who managed to get over, it wasn't necessarily their aim to put in roots here. It was like, I want to work during strawberry picking season, and then I want to go back home because that's my home, and I want to give money for my family. That possibility began to foreclose really heavily in the 90s when we started building more walls and making it more arduous to come across. So we just tend to not think about these things. And I think maybe living abroad for a while kind of turned I mean, I'm married to a naturalized U.S. citizen from France, and know a ton of multinational couples, and it just I'm too old to be like infuriated by it, but it's a constant irritant that people want to find. I mean, I was just looking today at the LouRockwell.com website, which I don't necessarily encourage anyone to visit, but I was tweeted at me, so I looked at it, and it was a column by this old crank named Paul Craig Roberts, who's like, the founding whites have been divided, and now the power of the illegal invaders has grown. It's like, can we stop? I mean, I recognize that there are specific emotions that are associated with like sanctity of country, of nation, and all of that, and I don't discount them. I think that they're real, and people feel it, and have a sense of pride in where they live, and also some people feel a sense of dislocation when the tenor, the look, the feel, the culture of a place that they live changes very rapidly. That can happen, and I have respect for it. What I don't have a lot of respect for is people just not even thinking through how they are regarding other people and their motives. The idea that the people who are trying to come in the border are doing it because they want to overthrow the country is so garbage bananas, and it's been mainstreamed pretty heavily over the last 25, 30 years in different political pockets in the country. And it's a shame. I mean, it's self-evidently hilariously wrong, but also it leads to people making collective demonization and bad laws based on that, and that breaks my heart.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of my bit here on the show. Los Libertinos, a little play on Latino and libertarian, and I'm an advocate for I guess porous borders, or make it. I've had on. I'm sure you know him at he's probably one of your homies. Alex Norwashta on,
Mm-hmm.
and
He's great.
yeah, so I like that kind of stuff, but I also understand the other side. That if they grew up that way, or if not a little bit grew up, and if they're looking for the others side or others, I get it. I don't hold it up against them too much, because I know for the most part, like if we were hanging out, we'd have some beers and just talk some shit and have fun and what like I would I know that's what it would be, and so that's part of what I'm doing too on the show, is I'm trying to like talk to my Latino people, or my family, friends, and all that. Like, hey, there's other ideas out there besides the ones that you've just been conventionally told, like, oh, vote Democrat, or vote, like, or Democrats are for the poor, and like those type of like those type of ideas. So I'm just trying to be like a gateway between those two types of ideas or whatever. But that's a little bit of my bit, and I try to do with sports. Like I'm more of an advocate for football, soccer and boxing, and then I'll even say kind of like, I don't know why Republicans or Democrats, I know they do it for different reasons, but Republicans, because I'm right leaning, I lean right on most things. Why they don't reach out to like Latinos that we listen to these narco corridos that are basically against federal powers and federal like all these songs that all these people are singing are like fuck the government songs, and like I don't even know why you don't reach out to us or to a lot of us, but I don't know. I guess that's just the way it goes. And
one of my
go ahead. Yeah.
One of my friends and a guy I admire a lot and have worked with in the past in Southern California journalism's a guy named Gustavo Arellano, who for years wrote the Ask a Mexican column in the OC Weekly, and now it's just sort of like a point man of a bunch of different things for the LA Times. Wonderful writer, wrote a great book of 10 years ago almost now called Taco USA.
Yeah, if you know him, tell him I said what's up. He's told me no. I've asked him for an interview. So you tell him, hey, I talked to Carlos. Hey, get on the show.
I will, because I'm always like I told Bill Maher many times to get Gustavo on the show, and actually Gustavo's one who like he's always worked harder than anybody I know in Southern California journalism. So one of the reasons I have the stereotype of Mexicans working harder is because of him. Like he's, in addition to being the Ask a Mexican columnist, he was a restaurant reviewer and some other thing at the OC Week at the same time. And then he was doing a show, Border Town, right? He was helping to write the Fox show. And every time it seemed like, could you slow down? He's like, you gringos are lazy, not my fault. But anyways, he's come up with this idea of rancho libertarianism, where saying that there is, and it's narco corridos are part of that. Just like there is an innate sense of libertarianism, it doesn't map neatly onto the normal American or the usual American context of libertarianism, but it's interesting there. I'm interested, since you're close to the southern border. I mean, the extent to which a lot of heavily Mexican American districts have flipped their voting over the last like 5 years. It's astonishing. My colleague Michael Moynihan has gone down there at least one or two times to write about that. It's fascinating. So anything
what did he get? What did he get out? I mean, I would just think that, just like I told you about the very idea that I told my nephew just how to learn to be one of the three or respect the three, like I don't know, supplier, the middleman, or the client. But if you're the middleman, you're gonna, just me telling them, hey, I just told you how to make $500,000. Okay, well that conversation would have not gone on my parents' head, their parents. So I just think that as generations gone by, Mexicanos or Mexicans, they got some more money and they start figuring out, hey, you know what? It's not about Democrats for the poor or whatever. It's about what's in my wallet, So they're just going to lean or be at least more open to hearing somebody. They're going to be more open to whoever's going to keep more money in their pocket, probably, I guess. I mean, I would think that's probably what it is. I don't know. What did he say?
I will butcher his
okay.
I'm sure more nuanced take, but a lot of it is some of those places were places that were like literally affected by illegal immigration, right? Because of the kind of the weaker spots along the border where people can go. So they're having their property trampled over. They don't like that at all. They look at the cultural expressions of kind of elite democraticness, Latinx shit and all that. With like, what language are you speaking to me, and stop it. So it's like a combination of those two things. But again, Moynihan will have a more like complicated, nuanced take. I don't doubt, but I just like, regardless of who votes for whoever, I think we're finally getting to a place which was not very conceivable 20 years ago or 25 years ago, starting in my own brain. I mean, when we were growing up, everyone with an accent or with slightly brown skin was a Mexican. That was it. And now it became Latino, but Latino was largely, people are finally starting to realize there's a difference between a Puerto Rican and someone from Mexico and someone from El Salvador. I think we're finally getting these kind of sense of distinctions. And it's great because, I mean,
and they don't like each other. Like Puerto Ricans and Mexicans, when they box, like it's a rivalry. When there's a Puerto Rican and a Mexican in a boxing match, Man, they, the back part of the show or whatever, the lead up, the hype up, it's always about the rivalry between Mexico and Puerto Rican fight. So yeah, I mean, it's really, yeah, there's differences, people.
It's awesome, and to try to treat this sort of unvariegated mass of people, hundreds of millions of people from dozens of countries as one, it's ridiculous, and I think that's finally starting to break apart. Couldn't happen too soon, and having different voting pockets illustrates that in a way that's nice.
Yeah. To shift a little bit to more like current events, the Queen has, recently passed. And to me, I had no real connection to any of that other than, the only times that I really heard their national anthem was like when I would watch like World Cup games and England plays and, they sing the songs or whenever there's national tournaments like that. And I guess now instead of God Save the Queen, it's going to change now, I guess. So what is your whole take on, I guess, the Queen passing, the monarchy as it stands, but also, this was kind of cool because I do like this kind of talk because it always fascinates me. It's like when you hear about like when people say, oh, like she has her subjects and all that. So in your answer, can you kind of bring in also what your understanding of like sovereignty means when you talk about that? Like because we seceded from the English and all that, and we kind of became our own sovereign entity and all those different, so a lot of that stuff always fascinates me. So yeah, if you don't mind, just freestyle a little bit on some of that.
I've always found, just like any juvenile would, not juveniles are right sometimes, that there's something inherently ridiculous in a monarchy. That's the whole point, is that we don't live in one. Why would you have a king? What's wrong with you? Kind of thing. You soften as you get older. At least your heart opens up to understanding that people have different views than your own. And the argument that I've been reading this past week is it's kind of an interesting one, which is that, okay, if regardless of whether you have a monarchy, a king, which is a pre-rational construct, pre-enlightenment construct, you're going to have those nationalistic desires, like the animal spirits of nationalism, of wanting to have a common story, even the pomp and circumstance about it, is perennial. Like we just have it hardwired into our systems. So goes the thought. And so, given that, isn't it a good idea? I've seen Andrew Sullivan talk about this, Ian Leslie, some other writers. Isn't it a good thing to have this basically toothless vessel, so you could channel those desires or express those weird feelings in a way that doesn't really hurt anybody? Like the people who got hurt by the monarchy at this point, the hurting is that, yeah, okay, they're living on your money, and that probably sucks if you're a subject. I certainly don't like to see, and there's been a fair amount of this, like protesters are being hauled away in London, and that's terrible. And it's again why First Amendments and written constitutions are better than a basic understanding of that. But so I think it's an inherently silly kind of institution that she performed very admirably for a weird and silly job. And I mean, like, people are passing around the links of her at her Jubilee, I guess, and also at the Olympics, but the one where she's with Paddington, and then the other one she's like jumping out of a helicopter with James Bond. That is appropriately self-effacing and silly enough that I think kind of points to that sense of toothlessness. I'm glad that we don't have that. I do think that we are channeling a lot of our weird animal spirits in unhealthy ways in our democracy and republic here right now, and have been this since basically 2015. I mean, Trump supercharged that. He's not solely responsible at all for that. It sort of tapped into it and helped shape it. But we're living through a populist moment on the right and the left, in which populism always goes towards a people's king of some sort, right? You want there to be the champion of the people to use government power to smite the bad guys and the enemies within and without. And I mean, there was a conference just this past week called NatCon, right? The National Conservatives, who are trying to kind of intellectualize the post-Trump conservatism, and at which they were saying things like, you know what, our problem before was libertarians, obviously because we have so much power, that conception of power is wrong. We have to learn to love to use government power to further our aims against a society and the elements within it that are hostile towards us. That's what happens under populism. And Bernie Sanders wants a powerful executive, regardless of whether he is against some of the uses of that executive power in places like war. Populism always does that. So I can see how maybe one would say our lack of a monarchy is somewhat to blame for that. But I think that just like having when I was 18 years old, my parents cut me off because I'd screwed up. I got kicked out of school. And so I've been paying for myself ever since. When you start being responsible for your own affairs, you become more responsible. I know it's tautological, but it's also true. And I think that part of the success of America, as flawed as we are, and as in a weird patch as we are right now, is that we got responsible for our own affairs earlier, and the ideals that we espoused at the time and our aspirations, unattainable aspirations, but aspirations nonetheless, that we proclaimed at the time, were ones that allowed us to grow up in a way that makes monarchy inconceivable. Now, what I want to do is to try to make as inconceivable the kind of democratic, lowercase d, monarchical impulse. I want us to stop making every issue about the federal government and every desire be something that you want the executive branch within the federal government to solve or address one way or the other. I think that we need to start taking responsibility, especially where we live, people that we're living with in our local communities and local governments and churches and societies and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's been going by the wayside in this populist moment. So if we can learn anything from the the endless at this point funeral that's going on, is that like, okay, maybe let's not venerate anybody in this country that much. Let's like get to work and go on with our lives.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Please check out the Morning After podcast. It plays Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 7:30 Central Time. Justin and the crew, they're all funny vatos that the new term that I heard this past weekend was gringons, right? So basically somebody that's a gringo but chingon. Well, all these four guys, I would consider them that they're good vatos, they take the subjects that are the current news that's going on, and they like to turn it around and give their perspective, and it's funny. Now, the show definitely has an edge to it. So if you don't, if you like a show that's very clean, then this might not be your show. But if you like some funny, edgy kind of content in the mornings, then check out the Morning After podcast. Justin and the crew, you'll catch me on the chat there because I like to be in it, and I've been on the show a couple of times. So yeah, good vatos. Go check it out. I'll put a link at the bottom. Go subscribe, and I'll see you there. Peace.
Yeah. So yeah, the queen was so sovereign that she didn't get into the games of politics, and so she was respected. And I didn't know that NatCon was going on I interviewed James Pogue. He wrote a piece on Vanity Fair about the new right, and it was about him going to a NatCon conference where I guess a lot of these new players that are currently running for like Senate, like JD Vance and
Right.
some other guys.
Blake Masters from
Yes, yeah,
Arizona.
and
Yeah.
the Peter Thiel billionaire guys are flirting, I guess, with a little bit of these ideas. I've heard some of these ideas, and the monarchy one, I don't discount it. I discount it as that it's something that will happen, but I do find value in that. I like the way it scales from like a family hierarchy, a business hierarchy, and you can then see how that same hierarchy could go into like a president or CEO or a governor. You know, like I think I think when I was hearing you say that, if stop making the president to be this Vato that's almighty.
Mm.
If we stop doing that, we then might care more about the like our governors because they're closer to us. You know, these we would like think of them a little bit more like presidents or kings or queens or whatever. But yeah. I mean, I don't know what the whole take on that is. So there is intellectual backing from a lot of that comes from this guy named Curtis Yarvin. What is your take on him? I think he's a smart vato for sure. Speaks with a lot of history. He catches a lot of history everywhere, and he ties it together to package it in an entertaining way. I mean, it's good to listen to. But I don't know. What is your take? Like being in like a publication like Reason and all that. Like what is y'all's take on something like someone like Curtis Yarvin that is influencing a lot of these populist ideas?
I am not a fan. I appreciate the hustle, and some of his writing has a bit of a flair to it. But he engages, and a lot of those guys engage, and they do a large amount of scapegoating immigration as well. That group of people, like JD Vance. I think in the first week of Russia invading Ukraine, it's like, why should I care about Ukraine when the fentanyl coming across our open border is killing, X thousands of Americans. Like you could see he tested the line out. He thought it was really the one that's gonna win the day.
He's the one with that commercial that says like, I don't hate Mexicans or something. It was like a weird commercial. He did a commercial that where he straight up says like, I'm not a racist. I like Mexicans. I forgot what it was, but it was a funny one. I think he was one of those guys that.
I wouldn't doubt that for a second. Yarvin engages, and I see a lot of people who are more explicitly libertarian and who engage similarly, and in this, which is a collective demonization of people or industries, pockets of politics, or people who happen to work in certain professions. I mean, he's the one who's popularized the phrase "the cathedral" to talk about everything, all the stuff that you don't like, right? It's the media, it's the political elites, it's academia, it's entertainment. It is the cathedral. And there's, maybe if it doesn't have its own one pope, you get the idea. And if you do anything against the cathedral or against the regime with a capital R, then you're a brave truth teller. The problem with that is that you're engaging in collectivization of your own. All right. Some people are doing in the name of anti-collectivism, but your collectivist insult is collectivism, even if it's in the name of anti-collectivism, right? Like as soon as you start,
is that the hustle? Is that his hustle where he does cathedral, but then he'll say it's decentralized? So it's like he's in these two worlds where it's like it's the cathedral, like you said. There was the way he said it, but then he'll say, but there's no one. It's all decentralized, connected, and that's why it makes it so powerful. I mean, that sounds interesting, but I don't know. I mean, is that a little bit?
It's a shortcut to conspiracy theorizing for sure, because someone's got to control it. All you have to do is see, like, who can't you criticize? Then you'll find out who the real power is, right? Like I have seen this. I'm old enough to have seen this play out in a lot of different countries, in a lot of different contexts, including in America. It's not a shortcut to rationalism. It's a shortcut away from rationalism. And also, when you start believing it, when you start getting high on your own supply, if you truly believe that there is a single monolithic entity out here who is going to dismantle all that is good and right and then force you to eat your own shit, then the only logical thing to do really is to take up arms, right? Like seriously, if you really believe what you say in a similar though not exact way that Joe Biden is going to have a summit against hate tomorrow at the White House. Looking forward to that one. If you really think that a big swath of the country is semi-fascist, as he put it, or even all the way fascist, and I mean, if we had tens of millions of fascists in this country, there should be a lot more fighting in the street. I don't want fascists in this country. Fascists suck. If they were actually fascists doing the fascism, that's not what's happening. What's happening is that people are riling up their own kind of base or are trying to attract people into their apocalyptic worldview. I'm against apocalypticism, right? Curtis Yarvin, back when he was writing his Mencius Moldbug, all the people around the Claremont Institute Review of Books, Michael Anton, back when he was writing his whatever the hell, the Flight 93 essay in 2016, all of that depends on a certain monolithic view of the other team as in the process of doing unspeakably bad. And everybody in there is therefore bad. And you're either with them or you're against them. This is the only thing. These are the only possibilities of being. It's ludicrous on its face when you like take it out of its context and just sort of think about it for a half a second. It's ludicrous if you go to whatever your local big box retailer, store, or mall, or baseball game, or anything, and just start talking to the person next to you who might have voted completely opposite of you, and they're like a normal person. It's fine. Nobody wants to stab each other in the neck. But like in the sliver of people who are way too online and talk to each other about politics in a certain way, you can kind of rile people up and get them excited to believe that they're part of this great, rebel force out there. I think it's deeply irresponsible. I think it's intellectually dishonest. And I don't want those people near power, because what they want to do ultimately, and they're saying it out loud, they want to use that power to smash their enemies. And the people, the politicians that they support are increasingly going to view things like that. I mean, Ron DeSantis, who is no Donald Trump, is nonetheless making a lot of "I'm going to smash the enemies" type of discussion. He's do the anti-woke act, which is blatantly unconstitutional in Florida. He wants to tell private businesses what they can and can't tell their employees. Loves to tell people what they can and can't do in their own private business when it comes to COVID. No, this is not what we a party of limited government that I've never belonged to should sign off on. And it's certainly, I would hope, a thing that nobody who self-describes as a libertarian would find copacetic, of like waking up in the morning trying to smash the woke. Stop smashing, actually. Start cohabitating with trying to persuade, dismantle where you can. If there's a structure that needs dismantling, and there's lots right now in this country, but to whip up a frenzy against people, many of whom have no idea what you're talking about, you're going to get shit wrong and you're going to do bad things.
Yeah, man, that's funny. Some of these people, and I respect them, man. They're just people. We're just having conversations, about the great replacement theory. And I'll say, like, man, you guys just aren't smashing. So you're not having enough kids. So that's what's going on, So I told him, I'm telling him, like, when I got married, the first piece of furniture that I wanted or thought about was a dinner table, because I wanted it full with little kids, like with my children. I didn't know how I was going to pay for them. It didn't mean that I was going to get them on welfare or anything. I just wanted a lot of little pinche huerquillos there, just around, But yeah, no, I hear you, man. You had mentioned, because I know I don't have too much time with you left, man. I want to kind of go through. You had mentioned that you lived in Central Europe for 8 years. But can you kind of talk about that, but also in the context of like NATO, the U.S. Player in that, and Russia, Ukraine? I'm sure you could put all that together a little bit there. I mean, that's a interesting one.
Yeah, I covered the expansion, the initial post-Cold War expansion of NATO. So a lot of things that people say about that are things that I know, and I was writing about it in real time. To boil down an extremely long story shortly, one is I would encourage people to read piece I wrote for Reason cover story about at the outset of the war. It was called After the War. But part of what my argument there was that at the end of every major war, there is usually a big post-war settlement, right? You got to redraw borders and you have to secure them via international treaty. A lot of times you have to shift populations. You have to come up with new security guarantees or arrangements. There's usually a question of reparations that goes into it, and rebuilding, and who's going to do it. This happened after World War I, World War II, large wars. This always happens. It didn't happen after the Cold War, and I think that was a calamity, a mistake that I lay was mostly at the hands of Western Europe. At the time, the European Union was just starting as a kind of a stronger entity and becoming the EU before it had been more of a collection, the EC. And when the Yugoslav War broke out in 1991 on European soil, and with basically concentration camps and rape camps and horrible bloodshed and large refugees, Europe absolutely screwed it up. Germany was pushing over here for Croatia. Russia was coming in over here for Serbia. The Brits were like doing this and that. And they couldn't agree on anything. The French were doing this. And they all punted and basically said, America, can you fix it? Those first couple of years after the end of the Cold War, America was kind of happy to get out of things. Bill Clinton was not about, George H.W. Bush had prosecuted what was at the time was a very popular and successful war, the Iraq War. And had a 90% approval rating. And, the end of the Cold War happened on his watch. And people by 1992 were sick of hearing about it because we had a mild recession and like, enough already. Can we get the peace dividend? People were talking a lot about the peace dividend back then. We cut military spending year over year for the first time since forever. We decommissioned a bunch of bases, including in Long Beach, where I'm from.
And in San Antonio here too. We had a lot of bases here that there were some that were cut here too. That's probably part of that. I didn't even think about like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and which could be locally traumatic, but it was basically done on a national level in a responsible way. There was a base closing commission, did all this stuff. Clinton did not want to expand NATO. It wasn't like him and Bush going, "Gosh, what can we do to expand NATO?" It wasn't like that. He had to be pulled into it, dragged in, kicking and screaming by the Central Europeans, by the guy behind me here, Václav Havel, especially Arpad Günc of Hungary, Lech Walesa of Poland. They were saying to them, like, look, the history of our region is one where our small, generally poor countries are surrounded by large imperial neighbors who will dominate us. We need a security guarantee. My argument is that Europe should have, in this moment, said, you know what? NATO, this whole thing, we're going to run that now. It is, after all, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was designed to contain Russia, or the Soviet Union, but it's all about European soil. We're Europeans. Thank you, America. High five. We don't need to have as many people in Germany and elsewhere. Go ahead, and we'll take care of it from here on out. They didn't do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to pay the money for it. They lacked the political will, and they lacked the muscle memory of being responsible for their own affairs. And so this left the Central Europeans, many of whom were pretty great countries. Czechoslovakia had been a great country in the interwar period, but they were lacking a security guarantee. They needed something. At first, Václav Havel did not want NATO. He wanted the Warsaw Pact to go away. He wanted NATO to go away, and he wanted to create a new European institution. He spent a lot of diplomatic energy on that project in 1990, 1991, and 1992. Went nowhere. So at the end of that, what do? Like, okay, there's only one game in town. All right, can you please let us in this club? And took a long time, actually, to let them in the club. They had to create and then go through a process. So a lot of that leads to the current moment and the sort of lack of taking responsibility for things. Meanwhile, on the Russian side, they experienced the end of the Soviet Union, especially, to be a trauma. You lost your empire. They were going to be okay with that. Maybe they knew they couldn't control Hungary from afar or Czechoslovakia from afar forever, and that there'd be resentment built up. But they had a large country which suddenly dissolved, and you have the Baltic states couldn't be happier to be independent. and away from them, and also in NATO as soon as they could be. And they had this sort of unrequited nationalism. They feel a sense of humiliation and disgrace. And from the beginning, from 1990, 1991, they started going in places that used to be part of their empire and conducting horrible massacres, right? In Georgia, in Moldova, Abkhazia. They were doing bad things at the time, and that you knew that there was going to be this sort of nationalist, aggressive over response to it. And that happened long before anyone had any idea about expanding NATO. So I hear a lot of, I think, loose commentary of like, whoa, this wouldn't have happened if we hadn't expanded NATO. I understand there's great arguments against expanding NATO. And
that's what I know. That's what I know. So that's hearing you is something. It's a different angle, you know. I mean, no, I didn't know that it was about like what you're saying about like these smaller countries didn't have a way of like feeling secure, so they were the, you know, I always thought that it was like NATO trying to expand for.
Nope.
Okay, you see, yeah, that's
it really wasn't.
I'm learning, you know.
I was working for United Press International in 1994 in January when they had the Partnership for Peace Summit, and that was the Partnership for Peace was the name of the thing that became NATO expansion. That was sort of the process. And initially, Russia was part of that, by the way, or it was open to Russia to join the Partnership for Peace. Bill Clinton came to Prague to talk with all the heads of state, and I was with the Polish delegation, and I asked, I think, the foreign minister at the time, how did the talks go, and of course Clinton during his trip he hung out with Havel. Havel always liked to drag visiting dignitaries to the pub, have them drink a beer, and try to loosen them up. And Clinton went to a local jazz club and played saxophone at a jazz club on Narodny Street, National Street. Anyways, the Polish guy's like, well, we've gone from Neville Chamberlain's umbrella to Bill Clinton's saxophone. That was his quote. And Neville Chamberlain being the guy who sold Czechoslovakia to Hitler, more or less, at the Munich Agreements in 1938. So even, you know, this, if you listen to people now, it's like, oh yeah, this is NATO's idea, America's idea to expand NATO. No, Poland was dissatisfied with the pace of how fast America was doing that, and thinking that if they don't, you know, come out just right now and say, yes, we will secure your borders, or like give you a national security guarantee, they were sorely dissatisfied. The question that people have to ask themselves, my anti-interventionist friends with whom I agree on so many things, is where do small countries go for their security guarantees in a world that they've been invaded multiple times by either Germany or Russia, or both, sometimes in the same year? Where do they go? What do they do? How do they solve that problem? You have to have an answer to that question. And again, Havel was looking for an answer and trying to create the answer with no Russia, no America involved. And the Europeans at the time, the French, the Germans especially, and the British, were not motivated or capable of doing it on their own. And so that leads to this sort of hegemon on autopilot that we have now, which I think is the worst of all worlds. I think Ukraine should foremost be a European solution, not an American solution. It's become an American solution in many ways. We give by far the most amount of money and weapons to Ukraine. It could have been and should have been an excuse, as I wrote in my piece, to finally engage in that post-war settlement that we didn't do in 1990. I have less hope by the day that can happen, though at least Ukraine is expelling Russia in the last week or so, which I think is very heartening news, because I think sovereignty of a country is an important principle, and we should root for people not to be swallowed by their nuclear-armed neighbors.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to hear this different angle, and I always consider myself open to listening to all kinds of different ideas or you know, the way different angles. So no, I gotta check that. I gotta check your article out and check more of that out. So getting here close to the ending, the midterms are coming up, and to the same line of thought of like having an independent mindset, and that kind of leads into like this idea of the other major voting bloc, which is like independents, and you know, both parties go, you know, when they get into the, you know, whether it's the midterms or the presidential election years, they play to their base, but they also play to the independents by not going so hard on some issues. But I think over time, the independents have built that up, by leaving the two-party system. Um, uh, I guess the question is kind of twofold. Like, how do you see the independents playing out in the midterms, and when do you think a actual like third party will also garner that same respect of the two parties to get some concessions to them to actually get some policies that that a third party might want?
I think it's a bad season, and it has been a bad season for third parties. Um, Again, since 2015, I was shocked actually by how well Joe Jorgensen did, considering nobody knows who she is in 2020. It said to me that maybe there's at least some stable base of people who will vote for the Libertarian Party candidate, regardless of who that is. I don't know if that will still be true in 2024, but generally speaking, the share of the third party vote collapsed by 2/3 from 2016 to 2020. And I don't see any reason to expect differently, because the fundamental problem is that we're in a time of negative polarization where people are motivated to vote against. And so if you're voting against, you need a faction that can win, that can beat the people that you're scared of. And especially in an atmosphere where there's been so many closely divided elections at the presidential level, and where power is split at the Senate and it's contested in the House. Like, every vote counts. It's really easy to do that. And so it's going to be a difficult time, I think, for any independent or third party bids to capture that. That said, Donald Trump in particular is very unpopular among independents. So is Joe Biden. His popularity absolutely crashed as soon as he was elected from independents. But it can go back up with independents and Biden if things go well, which they're not really now. But independents are swingy votes. Maybe they will respond to Republicans overreaching on abortion laws in certain states and think, okay, this is the bulwark against that. They're not going to come back for Trump, and they're not going to come back for Trumpy candidates whose basic idea is Trumpism. So in the Northeast yesterday, in elections in New Hampshire, basically everyone who's running for office in the Northeast as a Republican is super Trumpy right now. And because of that, and because of other candidates like the ones you were talking about before, J.D. Vance and Blake Masters, being particularly weak in states that otherwise Republicans should win, Republicans might not take the Senate because those type of people and the whole national conservative agenda right now, it's not popular. It's a weird thing to try to do populism without having popular people. Like, it's pretty like negative and howlingly pessimistic, and the people who are attracted to it are oftentimes kind of crackpots, like Dr. Oz. I think in many ways, Blake Masters has a lot of crack pottery. Doug Mastriano and the guy who's running for governor in Pennsylvania. So the independent bloc serves as a brake on the kind of aspirations and the nuttinesses of the parties. So, I mean, it's midterms of an unpopular president during a time of inflation and post-COVID uncertainty. This should be an absolute slam dunk for the Republican Party. Everything we know about American politics says this should be a pendulum swing, and the pendulum should go to Republicans. But conservatives were the dog that caught the car on abortion with the Dobbs decision, and suddenly, there are all these laws on the books in places that to most Americans sound very extreme, that are suddenly the law of the land in various states, and so people freak out about that. And then they're bringing all these super Trumpy candidates who aren't good and aren't popular, and so independents are going to, well, nope, we're not necessarily going to do that. So I wish that there was a way that block of voters could be attracted to something rather than just kind of be the natural kind of doorstop to when someone's trying to slam the door open or close. But I think right now, in this sort of negative era That's the role of the independents, rather than all, jumping up someday and declaring their love for the next Ross Perot or whoever.
Perfect. Yeah. And finally, uh, you know, I think, we're mostly past COVID. I think, it's mostly back to normal. Um, uh, how do you think Reason did in the years during COVID? What what lessons are there to learn? What good things did you guys feel you did? What bad things did you guys feel that you might have done that you might change up on the next pandemic or the next I kind of equate 9/11 and the pandemic as kind of like these weird parallels where the world changed for everybody kind of thing.
Yeah.
When another one of those events comes, so I'm just kind of asking that kind of question, like to reflect a little bit on how Reason did, and then speak to what do you got coming up for Reason in the future?
Well, I'm just editor at large. I'm no longer in decision making or institution spokesman mode. So I won't necessarily go in full granular detail. I'll say for me, like, I think the Reason style of libertarian journalism is one that um, doesn't necessarily, starts with a broadly shared set of principles, but not necessarily the universally shared sense of answer to a question. And so this can be frustrating for people whose own sense of ideology or philosophy provides the answer straight away.
Mhm.
I'll give you two examples that involved me personally. 9/11 happened when I wasn't working for Reason, although the first piece that I wrote for Reason was like a few weeks later. So um, people who like the, for lack of a better word, Ron Paul supporters, or like people in the Ron Paul orbit, anti-war libertarians who might be attracted to antiwar.com. After 9/11, they had an immediate response, an immediate answer, and which was, it's largely America's fault, it's largely blowback, and we should do nothing. Um, I now again, I wasn't working for Reason, and I didn't even call myself a libertarian at the time, and my sense of foreign policy is different than the even the median Reason staffer, partly because of my experience in Central Europe. But um, that wasn't my immediate response. In fact, I was irritated by people who said it was America's fault, because I felt like, let's get all the bodies out of the rubble first for the people who just murdered 3,000 people before we start blaming American foreign policy. I found myself very irritated by that, whether it came from libertarians or Noam Chomsky or whoever. Um, and um, and then I was more, I was in favor of going to Afghanistan and deposing the Taliban and leaving, not staying. And to my eternal discredit, I was not in favor of the Iraq war, but nor was I immediately against, like saying, what the hell are you people doing? I should have said, what the hell are you people doing? The antiwar.com, Ron Paul style libertarians were immediately against, and they were right. And so their quickness, their having ideology as an answer, led them quicker to that truth. And it also made them more open to concepts of blowback. Um, Perhaps to my taste, it was too much of a universal explanation from their part, but they were more open to hearing those messages than I was at the time. I was open to that too. But like broadly speaking, people who were just like trying to react to events. So that, I think, sometimes can happen to Reason in general, because we are kind of truth seeking. And in the pandemic, I'm a parent of two kids who are in the school system here. I wrote a piece in March, 14th, 2020, saying, what the hell? Why aren't we closing the schools? By June 2020, when we had a lot more information, when we saw what the rest of the world was doing, when there'd been studies that had been done, we knew that we shouldn't close the schools and we shouldn't close the playgrounds. And so I have written scores of articles and cover stories and other things in the opposite direction of that. And I am fine with that as an outcome. There will be some people who will have said from the beginning, either, you should never have your kid in a public school to begin with. What's wrong with you? You sell out, which is fine. I always going to hear that. Or people like government shouldn't have power to do any lockdowns whatsoever. Had some version of an answer right away that if I think about it, I wrote a piece, I think in March 2020, railing against curfews in New York City and some other things. So just looking at myself, I don't think that I was slow at all to respond to the evidence about COVID. I won't speak for a reason that totally is an institution, but as a general principle, we are trying to see how the facts line up in the world and to understand them ourselves, and then make our own sense of recommendations about that. That makes us very frustrating, or seen as like being intellectual sellouts by people who get quicker either to the truth or to their idea about the truth that we might have a disagreement over. And so reason will perennially be viewed from those people as being too kind of weak or regime adjacent or whatever, which, free opinion to have. I think it's important to understand who you're talking about and what they believe in, and try to give a steel man of their best ideas, even as you're disagreeing with them, which I think I try to do with people within the libertarian movement. But I will disagree with many of them forcefully too in that process. But to understand where they're coming from, I think there's a subset of libertarian critics of reason who do not bother to try to understand where we're coming from, and they have a catch-all explanation, which isn't true, usually having something to do with cocktail parties. That's not a sophisticated understanding of how institution works, how journalism works, and how different strands of libertarianism work.
Perfect. Yeah, man, thanks for coming on. Could you please tell people where they could find all the stuff that you got going on? You're a busy man.
Yeah, absolutely. So reason.com is the site of all this great journalism, including podcasts with the Reason Roundtable over there. I do as you mentioned, a podcast called The Fifth Column with Camille Foster and Michael Moynihan, which can be found on Substack, wethefifth.substack.com. Go check it out. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot more drunken than the Reason Roundtable podcast. And you can follow me on Twitter at Matt Welch. Simple as that.
Perfect, man. Thanks for coming on. Hopefully you can come on again. And you're definitely a homie in a Vato, my books.
Appreciate that, man. Great
cool,
fun.
Man. Peace.